Chuck, thank you very much. When Chuck and I sat downtown that particular Sunday morning, we sat on one of the telephone poles at that gravel parking lot, and there were many gravel parking lots to choose from. But when we were done, we said a prayer. Also, I asked Chuck Winder, when I was governor, if he would help me put in the new roads and bridges that this state needed. I remember the difficulty you had at times because I kept saying, no, it's not enough. Go back upstairs. And ultimately what we did, just a few years after that, was saving minimum 88 lives per year because of the new roads and bridges that we put in. So I thank you for your service and also your service as a Navy aviator. Patricia, it's always a delight to be with you. Thank you. Paul, I want to say to you, thank you for hosting this in this magnificent facility. I know that you and your team put it all together. Tom has been praising you repeatedly as we've been approaching this particular evening. And I wish you well at the helm of Blue Cross. And Tom, you've done a tremendous job. And the thing about Tom is, he's a chaplain, right? But let me tell you something. If you knew some of his deployments, such as Delta Force, this man not only gave courage to those who were going to go into harm's way, he was with them, and it took courage to do what he did. So God bless you for that. A lot of wonderful people here, buddies of mine. I really appreciate it. Charlie Fee, who's the artistic director of the Shakespeare Festival, there's a tradition in theater that before a performance or a speech, you say, break a leg. And I said, I don't know that Paul wants you to say break a leg at Blue Cross. Yeah, that's good. We're covered. All right, I'm going to tell you all a few of the missions that have been taking place in this wonderful state, okay? I'm going to tell you what the atmosphere was in the aftermath of the United States pulling out of Afghanistan. I have a friend of mine who was special operations in Afghanistan, and he would tell me that his interpreter, someone who had said, I will stand beside you no matter what. And he was promised that he would be taken care of if he did so and supported the United States. And he said, I'll always remember when my interpreter told me of the birth of his son, the first child. And he said, this was one of the greatest fathers that he'd ever encountered because he would continually talk about the joy of that little boy and ultimately the first steps. And then my friend was severely wounded and had to be evacuated and never went back. And here in the United States, he then ultimately learned that his interpreter was captured by the Taliban. So was his family. And my friend learned that the interpreter and the family were all executed. But you can surmise that the interpreter was not the first one killed. He was to witness the death of his wife and his little baby. There was a 25-year-old American that after the fall went to the airport in Kabul with her American passport, thinking that still represented something, and presented the passport. And the Taliban took the passport and ripped it from her grip. And she said, give that to me. That is my passport. I am an American. And he immediately struck her repeatedly with the butt of his rifle, knocking her to the ground. Another young Taliban grabbed her arm and pulled her away and said, "You must leave immediately or he will kill you." She said, "I am an American." He said, "You must leave." She was so distraught that we learned that she was going to commit suicide. That was the atmosphere when, through fate, circumstances, a small group of us formed a team and said, we're going to do everything possible we can to get as many Americans that were left behind and Afghan allies out of there. One of those was Naveed Musa. Naveed, hold up your hand, my dear friend. Thank you. An Afghan American who has lived in Russia, Pakistan, speaks 5 languages, is a tremendous engineer here in Idaho, and a believer. Okay. Dan Nelson, Major, Green Beret, was a commander of special operations. He too wounded. Captain Joe Forney, Bishop Kelly High School grad, class of 05, West Point, and a company commander of the 82nd Airborne in Afghanistan. All right. So that was the nucleus, the 4 of us. But we also had the tremendous service of Colonel Tom Wilford, who became our comptroller and did so many things for us. When we learned about this 25-year-old American woman that was on the verge of committing suicide, I said to Naveed, "Can you please get her on the phone?" And somehow he accomplished that. And I spoke to her, and she was distraught, crying almost uncontrollably. And I said, "I know you're hearing a voice that you do not recognize. And it probably makes no sense to you. But I'm going to please ask you to not give up hope. Because I want you to know that there are people that are working day and night to get you out of there. Please do not give up hope." That was the setting. We began to receive the list of names of people that needed to be evacuated. And ironically, folks, we were receiving names from generals and admirals that couldn't get folks out. Naveed identified and funded safe houses. We had some 20 to 25 safe houses. The list of names continued to grow because the last U.S. flight was gone. It had left. There was nothing happening except the Taliban were in control. I remember I would get calls at all different hours of the day or night because there were still human assets on the ground, and they would say, "You need to move your people immediately. The Taliban are going to the following districts," and they identified them. And we knew if that was in the area where our people were. And that's when we taught them the old telephone tree. We call 1, you call 3, the 3 call 9, et cetera, and we moved them to different safe houses, oftentimes up to 5 families in one house. Once we used a safe house, we could never use it again. It had been discovered. So with this list, which is a manifest, we knew the names of all the individuals. We knew where they lived. We knew what they had done for the United States of America. We fought our own government for weeks. And I'm going to say this. I found that the career people at State Department, their heart was with us. They tried to do what they could. It was appointees that wouldn't do the right thing. And so the State Department asked me one day, "Do you have a manifest?" I said, "Yes, we do." They said, "We must have it." I said, "Will you give it to the Taliban?" And they said, "Probably." I said, "Then you will never, ever get it from me." I then called the Mexico Secretary of Foreign Affairs. I'd worked with many of these people in previous positions I've held, and I asked for political asylum for those on our list. Within 24 hours, they granted it. But think of the irony, folks. Our manifest, page after page, including Americans, are stamped with the seal of the government of Mexico, stating those on this list are under the protection of the government of Mexico, signed by their ambassador in Tehran. Trying to protect people that had served America and had been promised they'd be taken care of. We called the president of Palau. He too granted them passage to Palau. We then told our folks, this large number, that they needed to move from Kabul to Mazar-e-Sharif. What is it, 260 miles north, roughly? Because there was less concentration of the Taliban. But let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. At that point, when we made that decision to issue that directive, this all then fell on us. We had asked them to leave everything behind, their home, their possessions, and to trust us. And had any of them been captured or killed, it was on us. We chose a location and a date where we would have 8 buses in the desert waiting to get them. And we also had worked to have an Airbus that we would bring in. But we didn't yet have a place where we could land. We were ready to execute the plan. But we also had a backup plan, Plan B, and that was we might have to use the Mexican connection. We had 2 planes we had identified in Spain that we would fly to Mazar-e-Sharif and take them to Mexico. I said, only a little facetiously, once we get them to Mexico, we'll just walk them across the border because everybody else does. So I called 2 friends. I called Jim Risch. You all know Jim. And I called Jack Reed, a Republican and a Democrat. I asked each of them if they make one phone call for us. One was to the National Security Advisor, and one was to the Secretary of State. I said, we just need permission to land in Abu Dhabi. And that was granted. So we're now ready. We're ready to execute this. And then suddenly, we intercept another list. 50 more, and the airplane will now be at capacity without the 50. There is no room. And I remember how I felt when this happened. We hit the wall big time. I was so frustrated. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I got tears. Because for the first time I thought, how do we help people when all assets have now been expended, and yet we cannot leave them behind? And so I dropped to one knee and I said a prayer. I said, Dear God, I do not know what to do, but they cannot be left behind. And I immediately had this vision of Mother Mary holding the baby Jesus. And I jumped up and I called Naveed. I said, Naveed, the answer is this. Babies, infants, toddlers can be in the arms, in the laps of the parents on the plane. So that plane that had a capacity of 345 would now have 395. The people that was probably our most vulnerable time, because we'd now gathered them all together in one location, and when they were on that plane, they didn't know that they'd ever actually take off. And what one bomb or one attack by the Taliban could have done to 395 would be a massacre. I'm going to just give you a footnote. While that vision may sound like a Catholic vision, turns out, ironically, in the Islamic religion, in the Quran, there is an entire chapter devoted, and I mean devoted, to Mother Mary, who they revere. Okay? So anyway, the outcome was we evacuated 395 Americans and Afghans, and including one 25-year-old American woman who decided to not give up hope. We brought them through because promises made are promises kept. That's Idaho. Recently, a U.S. Marine told Naveed and I, he had been deployed and had been in the war in Iraq. And when he heard about what we had done, he said, "It is incredible what you did. You pulled off in military precision an evacuation that the odds were against you. But also, all the money, $1 million was raised, most of it right here in Idaho." Dan Nelson, Joe Forney did a magnificent job on that. When we gave notification to Tom, we said, "Tom, we're ready to execute this. We're ready to go. It's time for you now to throw the switches, to transfer the funds to the Middle East so that those buses and that aircraft will now move." He went to the bank. Tom Wilford, head of the endowment fund of the state of Idaho. Tom Wilford, who was one of the great partners in one of the great firms, and they said, "We suspect money laundering." Without saying a word, he picked up the papers, walked out, went to another bank, and told them, "This is critical, we must execute now." They did it. Well done, Tom. When I was governor, you're also commander-in-chief of the Idaho Guard. And so the 116th Brigade was deployed. 4,300 for 1 year to Kirkuk. I can tell you that for many of those families, this was difficult when you have one of the heads of the family deployed for a year. What percent of families in the military, Tom, are on food stamps? 31% are on food stamps, okay? We had to form family support units. Also deployed at the same time was U.S. Marine Corps Charlie Company, Reserve, Idaho, okay, to Fallujah. Not all came home. One of the young men where I'd been soccer coach when they were growing up, Luke Miller, sergeant. He received the Bronze Star with V for Valor because he left his good running tank to run and pull Marines out of a tank that was disabled and under fire, drag them to safety. When he got home, I said, "Luke, where did you receive the Bronze Star with a V for Valor?" He said, "Well, Governor, I got it in the mail." In the mail. I said, "I would have thought it had been more than that." And he said, "Well, I did too, sir, but it's fine." And I said, "Luke, would you like me to present it to you?" And he said, "Yes, sir, I would." I said, "Do you trust me?" He said, "I always have." I said, "So I can choose the time and place?" He goes, "Yes, sir." So Skip, I chose the next home football game at Boise State on the blue turf. And it was announced at the beginning of halftime, Sergeant Luke Miller received the Bronze Star with V for Valor. Nobody left the stands. It went silent. He and I walked to the middle of the field, attention orders, read the orders. When I pinned that on that young man, it was the greatest cheer with tears I've ever heard in that stadium. That is Idaho. It's who we are. March 16th, next next month, will be the christening of the USS Idaho, a Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine. Dennis Johnson, my buddy, has been a key part of that as chairman of the subcommittee on raising funds for this. Because the namesake state raises funds for its ship to improve habitability, because what the government issues is rather stark. And when you think of these young men and women that will be deployed perhaps 3 to 6 months plus, submerged, where their smartphones don't work, where they don't get the photograph that the little toddler's taking the first steps, or a happy Valentine's Day. So you make improvements to it. When they go into the crew's mess, it will look like they've walked into the Sawtooth Range. We will also have a scholarship in place for the life of the ship, which is over 30 years, for the family and crew members. So, how do states do in raising the funds? Well, Washington raised $250,000 for the USS Washington. Okay? Oregon raised $200,000 for the USS Oregon. Colorado set the new bar. The USS Colorado, they raised $550,000. All right, but they have 5 times the population than Idaho. What did we raise? $1 million. We've set the bar, because that's Idaho, you see? We've had this beautiful evening tonight, Paul, in your headquarters, which if you picture that submarine, it's even taller than your ceiling here, and just as wide, and 377 feet long. It's not only goalpost to goalpost, it's stand to stand. 139 personnel, a particular compartment that holds 9 Navy SEALs. What a warship. So, in this setting, hosted by Paul and your team here at Blue Cross, we're going to hear in a moment Tom's thoughts about what we do with this Operation Military Blessings, so that we can help young military families that take an oath of office that will defend with their lives, if necessary, the well-being of everything we know and cherish in Idaho and the United States of America. And in doing so, they often experience personal hardships or crises as young military families. They stand to defend us, and I believe we can stand to support them. Why? Because we're Idaho. That is who we are. God bless Idaho, and God bless these United States of America and all these magnificent men and women who serve to protect and defend all that we cherish. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.